Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to another video on watercolor instructions. Today I'm going to go do a simple landscape, the image you see on my right side. Uh, so as I said, if you haven't watched my cloud series, I would suggest you watch the cloud series. So majority of them is clouds. You come back, there's a horizon, there's some landscape, there's a different shades of green, there's a little bit of yellow. We could play around brighter yellows and other things, and then I'm going to finish off with a little bit of fence, and maybe I'll continue those fence all the way along, and maybe I'll throw in a couple of electric poles just to give a little perspective of the scale of the sky. We'll see how it goes. I hope it's going to be interesting, and there's something you guys can learn. So let's start. Okay, in terms of materials, I'm going to use this is my range of palettes, but for a paper this size, I'm not going to go probably bigger than this or even smaller. I've got a little bit of synthetic brush, but I'm going to just use mainly what you see on the right, smaller synthetic brush as and when it's needed. Couple of mops, one of these two mops for the clouds and a general landscape. And on my right, I have a John Pike watercolor palette. It's got 20 wells. I've put them into yellows, browns, reds, greens, and blues, and then a couple of grays. So that one is turquoise and that one is grays. I've got two bottles of water. One is for bigger washes, cleaner brushes. I want to just keep it a little while cleaner so that in case I want to use it for wash and other things. The paper I'm using is a Saunders paper. It's a 300-gram Saunders paper. I've just used a couple of cans of beans as my incline. That's very handy, especially when you're painting any of the landscape and other things. You want the water mixing. Gravity helps in making the painting is a little mix slightly better. And for the pencil, it's just a mechanical 6B pencil. 6B pencil is very soft, even though you paint anything. Trust me, the painting doesn't look any odd, or to be honest, I like the style of when I'm using the painting. The image, what you see on the right, is downloaded from Google Street View. So I've just been looking at different views where you can get some nice perspective. So even though the rolling hills look a little flat, I'm going to slightly exaggerate it. So I'm going to exaggerate the rolling hills, and let's do a few of the lines. So I'm going to add a little gate, and there is a bigger gate. So, and the connections. And there's a little bit of gravel. That's the first, and that would be the second. And there's also a small rolling hill. I would do that, and I'm gonna improvise as it goes. So I'm gonna just erase that particular line. So there is a little bit of plant, trees. That would be the bush. Comes over here, and let's say that's the fence, and there's also a tree here, and there's a little bit of bigger trees. And also when you look at it, there is a couple of small houses. Probably we can't see it. I'm going to see if I can squeeze in houses. A couple more rolling hills, and you can see I'm gonna just improvise as and when it goes. And again, the clouds I'm gonna do, if you've seen my videos, there's a little more cloud. I'm gonna improvise as and it goes, but that's just a shape of a cloud and 45 degrees and on my palette. So paintbrush, if we start, I'm gonna just come in, maybe a little bit of cerulean blue. I think there's a little bit of green. There's a roll of tissue. I'm gonna just clean the palette a little bit so that I can use some cleaner. And I usually don't clean my brush quite rigorously, so that should be enough blues. So I'm gonna put in a little bit of blue. This is cerulean blue. Cerulean blue, and I'm gonna do cerulean blue, but a little bit of gray. I'm gonna come in slowly, build the layer. So at this stage, while it's still quite wet, I'm gonna just come in, take a little more, build the sky, so to speak. I'm gonna make a crunch shape. I'll come back, make it a bit more darker. That's about it. And I'm going to come in slowly, add a little more gray. Gray, a little more gray, and gray, gray. As the clouds in the perspective, the smaller the clouds look. Gray, gray. Yes, at this stage I'm going to just use a clean bristle brush. This is just I'm going to just, wherever there's really sharp edges, I'm just going to try to soften up a little bit so that we don't have really sharp edges. And I'm going to continue doing that till I think the clouds are what I want. So I'm going to come in again, take a little more clouds out of that. Okay, so that edge looks too sharp. I'm going to just come in, take that, okay with that. Okay, so slightly smaller brush, a little bit of gray, and I'm going to come in, add that extra layer in the back, such as that there are clouds in the distance. I'm going to just dampen it so that the edges are not too sharp. Maybe I'm going to come in, add a little more dark. While the paper is drying too much, I'm going to just wet it with a small squeegee so that it helps in mixing. So and a little more. Okay, so I'm gonna let it run like that, see if it's something is needed. I can come back and adjust that. Right now the second layer is all a little bit of yellow ochre and green. As an undercoat, I'm going to put in a little bit of yellow ochre. So even though you don't see it, places where you leave empty, you can see the yellow ochre, and then it gives a nice contour. So this is just yellow ochre. I'm going to mix it with little yellow random places. I will come back and then finish off with green. So probably I could use a bigger brush, but we're almost covering the space. Okay, and while I'm doing that, as I said, I'm gonna just take a little more random yellow ochre and other things which are on the plate. I'm gonna just scatter it with a little bit of texture. So it just adds a little more depth to it. And now I'm using sap green. I'm gonna come in do the sections. So the far horizon really okay. Okay, I'm gonna let it dry for a second while I'm just still checking on my cloud. Adjust it where it's needed. If the edge is too sharp, I go with a little bit of tissue and then I soften it. If not, I'm going to just let it sit like that. Okay, so in this case I'm going to start using some synthetic brush, smaller brushes, just to give different layers. I have different shades of green, turquoise, a little bit of cool colors, and then bluish tones. Okay, so that's too blue. So I'm just following some sort of pattern. And with the other brush, I'm coming in doing smaller sections. Smaller sections, different shades of green, and maybe a couple of places I'm going to do okay, and a bit more rolling hill. I'm a bit mindful about okay, and I continue with the shrubs for each boundary I'm doing. Okay. Something of that nature. So I continue to build greens, browns. I'm going to come in, add the bigger trees. Much bigger trees on my right. And for that particular house, I can come in, throw a little more red. Let's call it a roof, and trying to break by adding a little more interest. So this is all about a little more patience. Just add enough degree of interest that it feels there's something going on in terms of rolling hills and a feel. And every time you do a feel, so I'm coming in, adding that front there. I'm barely dry brush. I'm gonna come in rough texture. I'm gonna come in, add a little more shadow to all these things. Moving on, I'm going to continue building that by mixing different shades of gray, green, while I'm constantly adding and this one mist is, this one is fairly green, so I'm going to come in green, so is the one right next to me. And the front make it gray, and I continue with different boundaries. Okay. Okay. So just enough texture to make it look. Okay. So I'm going to use a small brush, add a little more branch details to some of them. So I'm using a little burnt umber, and I'm going to come in, add a little bit of branches. That is important just to give so also it needs a little more shadow. Okay. So some sort of texture. Something going on in the background, and I'll add a little more shadow to this one. That should do. And now coming to the fence, so a little bit of crimson red, fairly a lot of pigment, and let's assume a little bit of shadow, 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 and I'm going to do that thing with slightly chrome gate. So that should be fine. I'm going to come in, pay attention to the details, and a couple of barbed wires. Oh, that one looks too symmetric. Break the symmetry. Symmetry, and I'm gonna maybe add a little more fence. I think I like it, so I just want to make this poles a little more stronger. Okay, that's fine. I'm gonna come in, add a little bit of foliage in front, so I'm just using a bristle brush, adding in a little more detail on the front. Mix and match a little more colors, gives you idea of grass. Okay, I'm happy with that. Only thing left is to add decay, so I'm gonna pick a little bit white, a little bit of shadow. I'm adding a little bit of depth. Okay, I think I'm happy with that. I'm gonna just come in and add a little more texture just to make it look like a house. And a nice way to show a house is by adding a little more smoke on the top. Same thing over here. Gives a shadow, and I come in little top, dotted. That's about it, I think. I would call it quits. So this is a simple exercise of how I would go about doing a landscape. Help me out, like the video, subscribe, and then hit that notification button so that you don't miss another video. Okay, first a little bit of critique about my work. So the gate in the foreground, I wanted to look at it a little bit shiny. It doesn't come along, and then also I think probably I could have gotten away with just wooden gate. That's the first thing I would say. I'm not happy about it. And then also the bush or the tree in the front, in the foreground, it needs a little more oomph, or it's just not. I could have done slightly better, maybe a tree or something like that. And then also, I forgot to add a couple of electric poles just to give the scale. and the houses, the smoke in the background, it had to be a lot more, or just to make it more visible. So, and maybe in the foreground I could have added a couple of sheep or something like that. So just to add a little more interest to the point. So to recap, the gate probably not the same style, a little more smoke, the tree slightly better, and maybe a couple of sheep or maybe a stone or something like that in the foreground, just to add a little more interesting thing. But other than that, that's again, as I said, it's an iterative process. You see what works and what doesn't work, and then you work on that, and then you carry on and then improve from that. I will stop here, and thank you, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.